As Ukraine and the United States unveil a new joint 20-point peace proposal aimed at ending the Russia-Ukraine war, Moscow's response remains uncertain and the war still rages. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the US-backed plan includes security guarantees, reconstruction support and a diplomatic framework while reaffirming Ukraine's sovereignty. The most difficult issues, territory in eastern Ukraine and the future of seized areas, remain unresolved. Will this proposal bring a lasting ceasefire? Can Ukraine protect its sovereignty without conceding ground? And how will the US strategic interests shape the outcome? I'm Henny Safe. Let's go in depth. According to the Washington Post, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has signaled a limited willingness to compromise on territory for the first time, unveiling a new 20-point peace draft that proposes a mutual withdrawal of Ukrainian and Russian forces from eastern Ukraine to create a demilitarized zone. Zelensky stressed that any Ukrainian pullback would only occur if Russia withdrew equally, with the aim of establishing a neutral, free economic zone, potentially overseen by foreign peacekeepers. The proposal follows weeks of intense diplomacy after Washington warned it could cut off support unless Kiev engaged with a US-backed framework that included major concessions. The plan also raises the size of Ukraine's peacetime military to 800,000 troops and calls for security guarantees comparable to NATO's Article 5, while avoiding explicit rejection of NATO membership. Russia has yet to respond substantively and continues large-scale strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, underscoring skepticism in Kiev about Moscow's readiness for a genuine settlement. According to the New York Times, Russia is likely to reject the revised US-Ukrainian peace plan despite its significant departure from an earlier draft that would have effectively forced Ukraine to surrender territory and renounce NATO membership. The new 20-point proposal, presented by Zelensky and crafted with American officials, includes security guarantees Kiev sees as essential to preventing future conflict with Russia and outlines plans for post-war reconstruction. The Kremlin, however, remains entrenched in its demands that Ukraine withdraw from the remaining parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions and formally rule out NATO membership, conditions the new plan does not meet. Buoyed by battlefield advances and a steady flow of new recruits, Moscow believes it can continue fighting and extract better terms. Analysts cited by the Times note that Russia is negotiating largely to manage relations with Washington and delay further sanctions, not because it is ready to compromise, making acceptance of the plan unlikely.
Ukraine and the United States say they are edging closer to a joint plan aimed at ending the war with Russia. But key questions remain unanswered and Moscow's response is still uncertain. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that Kiev and Washington have aligned on most elements of a new 20-point US-backed peace proposal. The plan focuses on halting the fighting, establishing security guarantees for Ukraine, and launching a diplomatic process that could lead to a broader settlement. According to Ukrainian officials, the proposal includes international security guarantees meant to prevent future attacks, as well as economic and reconstruction support once fighting stops. Zelensky stressed that the plan does not require Ukraine to formally abandon its sovereignty or its long-term strategic choices. However, the most sensitive issues remain unresolved: territorial control in eastern Ukraine regions and the management of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remain unresolved. and under discussion, and there is no agreement on how these areas would be addressed in any final settlement. Reportedly, Kiev has resisted pressure to accept territorial concessions, while the U.S. continues to explore compromise formulas. Russia has not formally responded to the proposal. The Kremlin has said it is aware of the discussions but signals skepticism, raising doubts about whether Moscow is prepared to engage on the terms presented so far. Meanwhile, the war continues on the ground. Russian and Ukrainian attacks have persisted across several regions, including deadly shelling reported in Zaporizhia, underlining the gap between diplomatic efforts and battlefield realities. As talks advance, the question remains whether diplomacy can catch up with the pace of the war.
For a deeper understanding of the matter, we're joined from Kiev by Mr. Ivan Ust, the advisor at the Ukraine National Center, and from Washington by Ms. Ginger Chapman, the lawyer and political analyst. Thank you both and welcome to In Depth. Ms. Chapman, I'll start off with you first. Now, the White House says the U.S. and Ukraine are closer than ever to a joint framework to end the war. From Washington's perspective, what is the driving urgency now? How much pressure is the U.S. placing on Kiev to move forward?
Well, first, thank you, Mr. Haney, for having us today, and greetings to your viewers and your guest from Kiev. And the driving force is the risk of escalation. We do know that Europe is planning on building up their own military reserves, and Europe is actually planning on a long-term war with Russia, which President Trump is desperate to avoid. And we see this in some of Trump's flexibility with respect to now. He is agreeing to some security guarantees. However, there are so many details to work out. And what we really have is a tale of three cities. We have Kiev, Washington, and Moscow. Kiev, Zelensky are dug in. Zelensky is still reluctant to give up any territorial concessions and is coming up with proposals such as the economic zone in place of the demilitarized zone. At the same time, we have Moscow. Putin is saying he wants a veto over any security arrangements, any security guarantees. These are the two biggest elements, territorial concessions and security guarantees. And we have President Trump in Washington. And President Trump is, unfortunately, he is waffling. He is not able to put his foot down and say, here is my plan. Ukraine get behind it. Europe get behind it. And this is because President Trump is trying to mediate a peace plan. At the same time, we are an active participant in the war. We're unable to be honest brokers in this war because we are providing assistance to Ukraine. And in fact, this is part of Washington's confusion. As Trump is pushing for an end to this war, we know that he wanted to have a peace plan signed on by Christmas. We see that Congress has just appropriated $800 million for Ukraine at the same time that Tulsi Gabbard, our director of intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard has stated Russia does not have the military capability to conquer or control all of Ukraine, much less Europe. So Washington is sending very mixed signals at this time, and that is not moving the peace process forward at all.
Mr. Zelensky has outlined this revised peace plan as significantly narrowed from an earlier 28-point draft and shaped in close coordination with the U.S. How does Kiev view this change? As progress or as a compromise, rather under pressure?
Hello, Henny. Greetings to you, greetings to Ms. Chapman, and greetings to all audience. Thank you for the invitation. You know, Henny, actually, I think that Ukrainian peace plan is a response to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump said that, the United States of America present a 28 points peace plan, so we need Ukrainian reaction. and Ukrainian reaction was this 20 points plan. But I'm not sure that there is a big belief that each of those plans can really be materialized, because we see that Russia wants to prolong war, Russia don't want to stop. As for Ukraine, we don't ready to sacrifice by our territories, and we always repeat that any recognition of the territories annexed by Russia is avoiding the aggressor, let alone that in 2017 the United States of America adopted the law, and that Donald Trump signed this law, that they should never recognize each of the territory of Ukraine annexed by Russia as a Russian territory. So it means violation of the local US legislation. Donald Trump understands that, and nevertheless, he made those proposition, and the Ukrainians, for me, in response, proposed its peace plan. But I think that the situation on the ground demonstrates that it's rather theoretical talks than practical one. Thank you, Henny.
Well, Ms. Chapman, the 20-point draft proposes security guarantees for Ukraine that mirror NATO's Article 5, involving the US, NATO, and Europe. Now, how credible are these guarantees from Washington's perspective? What would be required to make them binding? You've already mentioned that probably President Trump is giving mixed signals.
Well, actually, the security guarantees, this touches on one of the things that Putin is concerned about. Putin would like any final disposition, any final treaties, guarantees, rather than signed by executive order by President Trump. Putin would like them to go through our Congress and have them ratified as a treaty. Now, this is going to be difficult because this would require 2/3 majority of the Senate. This would require 66 senators. And as we see from the current composition of our Congress and our Senate, it is going to be difficult to get a 2/3 majority of the Senate to agree on anything, whether it's domestic or foreign. However, the United States Congress can encourage Trump to provide security guarantees, but once again, our Congress is deeply divided. We see on one hand, we have the war hawks, such as Lindsey Graham, who is continuing to insist on secondary sanctions against countries that trade with Russia. And we also have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is more interested in Latin America than he is in finding a resolution for Ukraine. So once again, Washington is not able to speak with one voice. Washington, and especially President Trump, are unable to set forth a specific plan and stick with it. In fact, Trump seems to be once again, the rumor that Trump listens to whoever last speaks to him. Trump seems to be waffling between the Ukraine side, the Russian side. One thing we do know from our new national security strategy is that Trump is trying to distance himself from Europe at a time that Europe is trying to drag the United States deeper into the conflict in Ukraine. So as far as security guarantees, it remains to be seen whether President Trump and Congress can successfully agree on security guarantees for Ukraine, something limited in duration and scope, for example, a 5-year guarantee with air defense, or a 10-year guarantee, limited time, very narrow. Security guarantees are more likely to be successful than a broad, open-ended security guarantee for all time. Yes. And of course, this also has to get through Moscow. So once again, it appears that this shuttle diplomacy going back and forth between Witkoff, Putin, Rustem Umerov, this shuttle diplomacy may just be buying Russia time to continue on the battlefield while we see how the war ultimately ends, either on the battlefield or through negotiated settlements.
Well, Mr. Us, you've mentioned territorial issues being a sticking point in the negotiations. Now, the future of Ukraine's Donbass remains at the heart of the talks. in what Zelensky described as the most difficult point. Now, Washington suggested the establishment of a free economic zone, which Ukraine says must be ratified by a referendum. How do you think this issue is being navigated?
Mr. Khaney, I think that a free economic zone is proposition just to propose something. I couldn't at the time believe in any possibility of this free economic zone, because let's imagine how many people in the world will be ready to invest money in this free economic zone when you have absolutely total devastating of the nearest territory. We understand that when Russia said that, oh, as they said, we released some territories, if you looked at the pictures of those towns and cities, it's completely destroyed towns and cities. So it's nothing, it's no people, it's no life there. And said that, oh, it will be weak economic zone, as for me is just a good idea, but this idea will not be materialized. That's why for me, a proposition about free economic zone, as I said, it's a response to Donald Trump, but in practice, I don't think that something can actually be happen, because the war is the war, and there is constant attack from Russian side, there is response from Ukrainian side, and even in those conditions, to say that, oh, that let's think about development, but it's a shooting. Shooting is not stopped, and first of all, before any talks, we should think how to stop fire, and that's the main problem, that we all makes the theoretical talks about future steps, but the first of them, to stop shooting, is not taken into account. Everyone said that let's think that it happened, and after that, but it's not happened. As I said, Russia don't plan to stop. Ukraine don't plan to give to Russia what they want, because in theory, these territories, it's a very hard moment, and in practice even more harder, because yes, thank you, Henry.
Yeah. Well, Ms. Chapman, Kiev and Washington reportedly have agreed on most elements of the framework, except two critical issues: Eastern Ukraine control and the nuclear facility. In Washington's view, is this partial consensus enough to keep pushing diplomacy forward?
In fact, the Zaporizhia nuclear plant is a great example of the distance between the two sides. Zelensky says, well, the original proposal by Donald Trump was a three-way split: Ukraine, Russia, and the United States jointly control it. And Zelensky has said, no, we will not work with Russia on the Zaporizhia plant. We have too much animosity towards them. And it's this animosity that is really the sticking point. And it's not just the Zaporizhia power plant. It is also the disputed territories. For example, the demilitarized zone and then the economic zone.
Yes.
Those are proposals Zelensky's setting forth to avoid territorial loss, to avoid territorial concessions. However, ultimately, this is territory that Russia intends to have control over because of the populations in the Donbass, Luhansk. So the intractable territorial concessions, the Zaporizhia power plant, the security guarantees, these are sticking points, and they are going to go through many proposals, many iterations. But ultimately, while the negotiations are going on these specific issues, the war is going to continue, and Russia is going to continue moving eastward, not just from the Donbass, but the Nikolaev region, and also towards Odessa. And it does appear that Russia is determined to take Odessa, which is going to leave Ukraine possibly as a rump state. And once again, to get back to Donald Trump, we see that Trump's main objectives in this negotiation is, for him personally, he wants to avoid blame for a catastrophic loss. Trump wants any credit for any peace that might result. And Trump also wants to move forward with business plans and post-war reconstruction, rebuilding, and business investment opportunities. But we are not able to get past the territorial concessions and security guarantees, and even the size of the Ukraine military. this 800,000 proposed force. This is unrealistic. Ukraine has no way to pay for this size military. Europe has no way to support a military of this size. Russia will never allow NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine as part of a security guarantee. So many of these proposals appear designed just to stall the process and feel out President Trump. However, Trump's only power here, his only leverage, is to force Ukraine to agree and to contain Europe and Ukrainian ambitions.
Yes.
We have no leverage over Russia.
Well, Mr. Us, what about Kiev's point of view regarding the unresolved questions about the future of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhia nuclear plant? What do you think Kiev wants or thinks the status of the plant should be?
You know, Henry, of course, the Zaporizhia nuclear power station is the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. That's why such a big attention. So Ukraine said that, okay, let it be under control of the United States of America. No Russia nor Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine not controlling this territory, but we are not ready to recognize it as a part of Russia. So if it will be the United States of America, for Ukraine it will be okay. The horse of another color that the United States of America cannot be ready to send their troops to secure the nuclear power station if it will be under their control, because it's in the middle of the war. That's why I so think that talks about those Zaporizhia nuclear power station as a whole talks about the peace is rather a pure theoretical one. And of course, Ukraine said that if the United States can guarantee management of this nuclear power station, it will be okay for Ukraine. But we understand that it will be not okay from Russia, because we see Russian position, and frankly speaking, Russia want to see US as a country that press on Ukraine to give up, but not the country that will have their local interests inside the territories that Russia thinks absolutely under their control. So the war go on, and we see economics start to play more important role. And when someone said that it will be very hard year, of course, but on the other hand, I saw the Russian economy. It's not in the best situation. We have the bad situation in Ukrainian economy too, but we have European partners who understand that Ukraine is the world that depend Europe from Russia. Europe from Russia, and Europe depend on Ukraine at that moment. That's why I think that support will be from European side, and Russia have no such allies, because China ready to receive money from Russia, and resources from Russia, but not to give money to Russia. It's very important. That's why I think economic crisis, that is something that can open the window for end of this war, just because when you have no money for this war, it's hard to be in this war. And what's Ukraine expect, we will see actually in the next 2026 year. Thank you, Henry.
Yes. Ms. Chapman, let's try and look beyond security guarantees and territorial questions. Now, the plan envisions massive reconstruction support, trade ties, and future EU accession path for Ukraine. How does Washington see these economic components affecting long-term stability?
Well, we do know from Trump's previous proposals that Trump views economic partnerships as more effective than a military deployment. We know early on in previous proposals, Trump had said, if we have our American workers, miners, corporations in Ukraine, that is a better security guarantee than if we have troops on the ground. And your other guest raised a very important point. For many years during this war, which is now at the end of its fourth year, Ukraine was hoping that America would send in troops on the ground to assist them in fighting. And this was a pipe dream. It was never going to happen. And once again, now that we may be approaching a resolution, Trump does not want to send troops on the ground in Ukraine. And this is because our own America is very divided right now. Many Americans want to withdraw our troops from overseas. We want to pull troops out of Europe. At a time, we just saw our new National Defense Authorization Act, where Congress, in defiance of President Trump, ordered in this act that a minimum of 75,000 American troops have to be stationed in Europe at any one time. So Congress is putting conditions on troops in Europe that Trump himself is objecting to. So long-term prospects, we know that Trump is a big believer in economic partnerships, in business opportunities. One problem for Ukraine right now is most of the resources, the mining, the energy resources are actually on the Russian side of the prevailing lines of conflict. But we do know that Ukraine will need funds to rebuild and reconstruct. We know that multinational corporations such as BlackRock, Monsanto, Chevron have all entered into contracts for post-war reconstruction. It's just whether we can get to this post-war, if we can get through these peace plan proposals, many of which are designed to sow the seeds of future conflict. For example, having NATO forces in Ukraine, the 800,000 soldier military, these are all sowing the seeds for future conflict. So economic guarantees, business partnerships, rebuilding, those long-term prospects will do more to guarantee long-term peace and prosperity for Ukraine than short-term putting NATO troops in and military type of guarantees. And we know Trump is a big economic proponent.
Well, Mr. Us, if Moscow rejects the plan outright, what diplomatic or military options does Ukraine have next?
You know, Henry, I wasn't sure that Russia say no to this plan. That's why war goes on, and it's a Russian constant statement that they want to achieve their goals either by military or diplomatic way. But we are on the 4th year of full-scale war, and if we return to beginning of the war, it was in 2014. So it's the 12th year actually, and Russia still not close to their targets. Furthermore, if you compare the map of August 2022 and end of December 2025, so the position of Russia now is worse compared to they have in August 2022. So Russia like to make a lot of statement about their successes, but as for me, the situation in Kupiansk is a very good indicator. After President Putin said that they control it, and 2 weeks after that, President Zelensky appeared in Kupiansk. And today, the information that I received from military correspondents that Kupiansk are still in the battlefield, it's not under Russian control. So the same situation happened in many parts of the front line. So the war will go on, and really Ukraine have enough forces to be in this war, and the main thing to believe that we can win this war. Thank you, Henry.
From Kiev, that was Mr. Ivan Us, the advisor at Ukraine's National Center, and from Washington, Ms. Ginger Chapman, the lawyer and political analyst. Thank you both for your insights and for joining us here on In Depth. As diplomacy accelerates, but fighting continues, the gap between proposals and realities remains stark, with sovereignty, security, and territory still unresolved. The coming weeks will test whether negotiations can outpace the war or whether the battlefield will continue to dictate the terms. That's all the time we have for this episode of In Depth. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.